There's a specific feeling that hits you when you check your account balance and see $200,000 for the first time. It's not a celebration exactly. It's more like disbelief mixed with anxiety. Because, on one hand, that's more money than you ever thought you'd have. But on the other hand, it still doesn't feel like enough. You run the numbers in your head and realize you're nowhere near retirement, nowhere near real security. And part of you wonders if you'll ever actually get there, or if this is just as far as hard work and saving can take you. My name is Anderson, and I need to show you something about $200,000 that completely changes the game once you understand it. Here's what most people believe. Getting to $200,000 is impressive, but it's still early in the wealth building journey, and the path from $200,000 to a million or more is basically the same grind that got you to $200,000 in the first place. Just keep saving, keep working, keep doing what you've been doing, and eventually you'll get there. That's the assumption. But here's the truth that separates people who stay stuck at $200,000 from people who turn it into millions. $200,000 isn't the beginning of the journey, it's the inflection point. It's the moment when mathematics stops working against you and starts working for you. And if you don't recognize that shift and adjust your behavior accordingly, you'll waste the most powerful wealth building years you'll ever have. Let me say that again. $200,000 is where everything changes, but only if you change with it. Think about what it took to get to $200,000. You probably spent a decade saving aggressively, living below your means, skipping the lifestyle upgrades your peers were indulging in. Every month felt like a grind because you were fighting against expenses, taxes, and the slow accumulation of small numbers. Getting from $0 to $50,000 took years. $50,000 to $100,000 took slightly less time, but still felt eternal. And $100,000 to $200,000, even with compound interest starting to show up, still required relentless discipline. So you internalize this idea that wealth building is linear, that it's always going to be this hard. That getting to a million means doing exactly what you did to get to $200,000 just 5 more times. But that's not how math works. Not even close. Here's the invisible threshold you just crossed without realizing it. $200,000 is the point where your money starts earning more than you can realistically save from your salary. Let me show you what I mean. If you're making $80,000 a year and saving 20%, you're putting away $16,000 annually. That's solid. That's disciplined. But $200,000 invested at an average 8% return generates $16,000 a year without you doing anything. Your money is now working at the same pace you are. And that's the threshold. That's the moment when compounding stops being theoretical and becomes the primary driver of your wealth. Most people hit this point and don't notice. They keep living the same way, saving the same percentage, thinking the same thoughts, and they miss the shift. Here's the psychological transformation that has to happen at $200,000. You have to stop thinking like someone building from nothing and start thinking like someone managing a machine. Up until now, your wealth came from your labor. You worked, you earned, you saved, and that's how the account grew. But from $200,000 forward, your wealth comes primarily from what your money does, not what you do. And that requires a completely different mindset. You're not just a saver anymore. You're an allocator. You're making decisions about where capital goes, how it's structured, and what it's optimized for. And those decisions matter more than how much you can squeeze out of your paycheck. Let me give you the numbers that make this visceral. You're 35 years old with $200,000 invested. You continue saving $16,000 a year from your salary. If that $200,000 earns 8% annually and you keep adding $16,000 every year, here's what happens. Year 1, your portfolio grows to $232,000, $16,000 from your contributions, $16,000 from investment returns, even split. Year 5, you're at $314,000. Still feels like slow progress. But watch what happens at year 10. You're at $508,000. And here's the key. Of that $308,000 in growth, only $160,000 came from your savings. The other $148,000 came from compound returns. Your money outweighed you. By year 15, you're at $821,000. By year 20, you're at $1.3 million. And of that $1.1 million in growth from your starting $200,000, over $700,000 came from compounding, not contributions. Your money did most of the work. You just had to let it. Now here's where the identity shift happens. You stop being someone who's anxious about saving every dollar and become someone who's protective of the compounding process. Because at this level, the biggest risk isn't that you won't save enough. It's that you'll interrupt the compounding. You'll pull money out for a purchase that feels justified. You'll panic during a market drop and sell. You'll get impatient and chase some alternative investment that promises faster returns. And all of those decisions, every single one, breaks the compounding curve. And breaking the curve at $200,000 costs you exponentially more than breaking it at $50,000 because the numbers are bigger and the time frames are longer. Let me show you what I mean with a real scenario. You're at $200,000 and the market drops 25%. Now you're looking at $150,000. That feels terrible. You worked years to build that $50,000 and it disappeared in months. So you sell to stop the pain, you move everything to cash, and you wait for things to stabilize before getting back in. Except the market recovers faster than you expect, and by the time you're comfortable reinvesting, it's already back to where it was. You missed the rebound. You locked in the loss. And now, instead of being at $200,000 on the path to compounding into millions, you're at $150,000 restarting the journey. That one emotional decision just cost you years of progress and potentially hundreds of thousands in future wealth. That's the danger at this level. The stakes are higher, the consequences compound. Here's where opportunities start looking completely different. When you're at $20,000, a job change that pays $10,000 more is transformational. It's a 50% raise, but when you're at $200,000 in investments, that same $10,000 raise is nice, but not life-changing. What's life-changing is a 5% better return on your portfolio. 5% of $200,000 is $10,000 a year. The same impact as the raise, except you didn't have to negotiate for it or change jobs. You just had to allocate smarter. That's the shift. Your biggest financial leverage moves from career optimization to investment optimization. And most people never make that mental transition. They keep focusing on salary increases while ignoring the fact that their portfolio decisions matter more. Now, let me give you the big decision that most people at $200,000 get catastrophically wrong. They treat it as permission to upgrade their lifestyle. They've been disciplined for a decade. They've delayed gratification, and now they finally feel like they have some breathing room, so they buy a nicer car, they move to a bigger house, they take the expensive vacation they've been putting off, and in their minds, they earned it. They deserve it. But here's what they don't calculate. Every dollar they pull out of compounding at $200,000 is a dollar that won't turn into $4 or $5 by the time they're 55. That $40,000 car they buy with cash, that's not a $40,000 decision. That's a $160,000 decision when you account for what it would have grown into over 20 years. The retirees sitting on $3 or $4 million didn't get there by rewarding themselves at $200,000. They got there by recognizing that $200,000 wasn't the finish line. It was the starting gun. Here's the career power shift that happens when you hit $200,000 and protect it instead of spending it. You stop feeling desperate about your job. You know that if things go sideways, you have a cushion. Not enough to retire, but enough to make choices. Enough to take a few months finding the right next opportunity instead of grabbing the first offer. Enough to negotiate harder because you're not operating from fear. And that shift in posture, That subtle confidence that comes from having options that shows up in every interaction. People sense it, and it changes outcomes. You get better offers, you get more respect, you get opportunities you wouldn't have gotten when you were desperate. But here's the thing, that only works if the $200,000 is still there. If you spent it on lifestyle creep, you're right back to desperate. The power comes from having it and not needing to touch it. Now, let me give you the warning that destroys most people's trajectory at this level. They start comparing themselves to people who got rich faster. They see someone who made a killing in real estate or crypto or a startup, and suddenly their disciplined index fund strategy feels boring and slow, so they start taking risks. They put $50,000 into some investment they don't understand because they're chasing the quick win. And maybe it works, but usually it doesn't. And when it doesn't, they just cut their compounding base from $200,000 to $150,000. They set themselves back years trying to accelerate a process that was already working. The people who turned $200,000 into millions aren't the ones who got lucky with risky bets. They're the ones who stayed boring, who kept contributing, who didn't panic sell, who didn't chase shiny objects, who just let the math do what math does when you give it time and consistency. Here's the thing about opportunity cost at $200,000 that most people never internalize. Every major purchase you make from this point forward isn't just costing you the nominal amount, it's costing you the compounded amount. If you spend $60,000 on a boat right now, you're not spending $60,000. You're spending the $300,000 that $60,000 would have turned into by retirement. And maybe the boat is worth that trade. Maybe the experiences and memories justify it, but you need to make that trade consciously, not impulsively. Because most people make those decisions based on the sticker price without ever calculating the real cost. And the real cost is always way higher than they think. So here's what I want you to take from this. $200,000 is the most important milestone in your wealth building journey, not because it's a lot of money in absolute terms, but because it's the point where the mathematics flip, where your money starts out earning your labor, where compounding becomes the dominant force, and what you do in the 5 to 10 years after hitting $200,000 will determine whether you end up with a comfortable retirement or generational wealth. The path from $200,000 to $2 million isn't 5 times harder than the path from $0 to $200,000. It's easier. The numbers accelerate. The returns compound on top of returns, but only if you don't sabotage the process. Only if you keep contributing. Only if you stay invested through the volatility. Only if you resist the urge to celebrate with lifestyle inflation. Only if you recognize that $200,000 isn't the reward, it's the seed. You have time right now to protect that seed and let it grow into something that changes your life. Not a lot of time, but enough. Enough to commit to not touching it for the next 15 years. Enough to keep adding to it even when it feels like the progress is slow. Enough to ignore the market noise and the comparison traps and the temptation to chase faster returns. Just stay the course. Let the math work. And trust that the compounding you can't see yet is happening beneath the surface, building momentum that will eventually feel unstoppable. And 20 years from now, when you're looking at a portfolio worth millions, when you realize that your money worked harder than you ever could have, when you understand that the decision to protect $200,000 instead of spending it was the decision that changed everything, you're going to remember this moment. The moment you learn that wealth isn't built by working harder, it's built by letting compounding run uninterrupted for as long as possible. And the moment you decided to give it that chance,